as I put it to the town and the community, like you've got opportunities to have these, magazine worthy like trails, right? Like the cover shot of a magazine, right? Like just someone like rolling down steep open rock with the ocean in the background. But we've also got the opportunity to really make this a really awesome community venue. And there was a ton of community engagement around this project. I mean, I sat down and had coffee with lots of people. And let me tell you, the town of Camden, there's like people have a lot to say.
Welcome to Trail EAffect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail EAffect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail EAffect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 185, we have Steve Kasacek back for his second appearance on Trail EAffect. Steve is the Assistant Director for the Outdoor Sport Institute located in Maine. We covered a ton of various trail projects that Steve has been a part of, along with the value of building relationships. Cooley Creative is the title sponsor for this episode. They design and build custom websites, as well as help companies with branding, photography, and e-commerce. Cooley Creative was started in Wisconsin, but is now based out of Bend, Oregon. Jared from Cooley Creative is a friend of mine. We've traveled together on multiple mountain bike trips, and sometimes he sends it. For more information about Cooley Creative, head on over to www.dudejustsendit.com. Yes, that's right, www.dudejustsendit will get you to the Cooley Creative website, so check it out. Cattle Mountain Apparel, the brand that was built by travelers, hikers, trail runners, and mountain bikers, with the motto of venture far, laugh hard. While I definitely use Cattle Mountain Apparel for mountain biking, Cattle Mountain is also my go-to choice for daily wear as it is super functional and comfortable. Cattle Mountain Apparel also offers a lifetime gear repair program with the goal of extending the life of their products while reducing waste in the process. If you ever damage any of your apparel, Cattle Mountain will repair it for free for life. By using the affiliate link found in the show notes or on the Trail EAffect website, a small commission will come back to the Trail EAffect podcast, which helps to cover the cost of expenses for keeping this show going. Now on to the Trail EAffect with Steve Kasacek. Here we are today on Trail EAffect. I have Steve Kasacek back on. If you all remember, Steve was also episode 115, which happens to be the second most listened to episode ever on the Trail EAffect podcast. And he is only second to Glenn Jacobs. So that's, pretty big shoes to fill there, but pretty awesome at that. And I think it just speaks to the strength of what you've been able to do in the trail community in terms of planning and design and where you're at now. Because, the previous episode really focused on how you got into trail planning and design and your role at IMBA. And then we closed with your role at the Outdoor Sport Institute in Maine, which is located in Millinocket, Maine. How's it going today, Steve?
Good, Josh. Yeah, man. Gosh, you got me we had a great convo leading up to this, and then you set me up with the second most downloaded, and you got me all fluttery again. I don't know who wants to listen to me talk out there.
We all do, Steve. We all do. And I mean that sincerely.
Mowing the lawn can get boring, I guess. Yeah, man. Outdoor Sport Institute, 2 years on from IMBA from when we last chatted. And gosh, a heck of a lot's going on, dude. It's pretty awesome. I think I talked about on that last episode how I'd worked with OSI, right? Like I knew Mike Smith, the executive director. But since then, we've staffed up. We've gone through some awesome strategic planning, and we've really, kind of honed in our focus and our goals and what we do and where trails fit into that. And it's really fun to be a part of what I would call a multifaceted organization, really with a huge focus on community growth. Like that's where we approach outdoor sport and trails and all the things trails do. And so, we've got this broad mission to empower active, resilient outdoor communities, which involves a whole lot of stuff. And really, first and foremost is partnerships. I think we're going to talk about coalitions later, every one of the stories I might tell is going to involve a bunch of partners. So if there's anything that I don't know what I said in our first episode, I was 5 months into baby number one and definitely sleep deprived. But hopefully I talked about relationships and, partnerships and building relationships and how important it is for this work. And I can't echo that enough as we kick off this episode. Everything that I have to say here is because of some really awesome people who gave me the opportunity or trusted me or put money forward to these projects, open their land to these projects, put their resources toward these projects because of a whole bunch of other people that help make these projects happen. So yeah, it's like, I can't say enough how important partnerships are. And like what OSI does in rural Maine, working in communities of hundreds of people, sometimes like 100 and some odd people, working in places that are not even municipalities. We have unorganized territory in Maine. So lots of places, where there is no organized municipality, but folks live there, there's still a sense of community. Yeah, I can't say enough how important it is to help all these people and all these different organizations coordinate and focus. That's a lot of what OSI does. That's a lot of what my colleagues do. But I do that in the trails realm too, right? Like we do that through all this community planning that we do. So yeah, there's I could talk about OSI forever, but there's some cool stuff that we're doing, engaging young people. We'll talk about that more, I think, later, like the trail crew we have up there. And then, if I guess on lessons learned, right? And what still holds true is like good planning and design. Gosh, we are helping a lot of communities across this state. And Maine, as many northeastern and eastern states, and just many places, has a lot of what we'd call legacy trails, right? Like a lot of old ways that might not even really have been designed for recreational trail use, or recreational trails that were quote unquote designed and built well before we thought intentionally about this stuff. So a lot of my work is assessment of trails and helping communities and land managers, landowners, figure out how to fix these trails, both environmentally, socially, all that fun stuff about sustainability, right? So I can't speak enough to, like, if you've got active projects, be thoughtful about them. You don't want to make a mess for someone later.
That's a good topic to kind of kick off with, because I was going to bring that in later on after another topic that we're going to bring up after this topic. But let's talk about planning and design now. So you did planning and design at IMBA. You've now done planning and design at the Outdoor Sport Institute, otherwise referred to as OSI. So you've got to see it through a couple different lenses now. What is your take on the importance of it, not only from a land and responsible use perspective, but a funding and community buy-in perspective relative to maybe somebody or an organization wanting to shortcut the process?
Well, yeah, I love telling stories, right? So let me tell a quick story about just like why partnerships, building relationships. I often talk about meeting people where they are. I tell people when I come into a community, I'm not here to necessarily make all the decisions for you. I'm here to help kind of guide you. Sure, I've got a lot of professional insight and a lot of, national, regional context. But at the root of it, these are community projects. And so working in this small community of Patton, 700-800 folks north of Millinocket, but still not quite in northern Maine. We had this project to do some community planning, and there's a really active and really robust, largest, I think, actually, ATV club in the state, just saying a lot, club in Patton, the Patton ATV Club. They maintain hundreds of miles of trails, right? Lots of good landowner relations. And so I met with a father and son who are actually like very involved in the ATV club, as well as the town. Cody, he's might be the first selectman. He's a selectman of Patton. And then this is like classic small town Maine, right? So I'm drinking my coffee, showing up to a morning meeting. I'd never been to the town office of Patton before. We had meetings at the Lumbermen's Museum most often when I've gone there. And So I missed the town office I was supposed to meet him at. I turned around, came back, and they were in the public works building basically next door, the town garage, because the town office is very small and doesn't have a meeting space. And so here I walk into a big garage with a fold out table and three folding chairs, and they're on one side of the table and I'm on the other. And I mean, they're hardworking like Mainers. And there was certainly some animosity, right? Because some of the folks who wanted non-motorized trails wanted to maybe simply use motorized trails. And, going back to good planning design, right? And understanding all the nuances of all this stuff, like motorized trails in the state of Maine, there's a lot of like more legal and stringent regulatory stuff that goes around motorized trails. For instance, they have to carry insurance. It's very different how they deal with landowners. It's regulated by the state more. The state is more involved in that. So you've got that aspect. You've got the aspect that they, plain and simple as they put it, we never asked any of these landowners for permission for people to ride mountain bikes. We just asked them if we could ride ATVs. So some of these landowners who we have to get letters from, they might not want bikes on their land or people walking. Third, they're like, we have safety concerns. And I was like, hey, I have all of those too, right? Like, I don't want to just use your trails. I understand all the complexities of what you had to go through to make this awesome thing happen. There certainly are risks, and safety concerns. Some of these are just like they're wide open roads that people fly down in UTVs, right? And so we had this awesome conversation. And I was like, but this is what we're trying to do. We're looking at some land over here. We might have to cross a couple of your trails, Hey, what about if we share maybe this bridge or this, right? And so through that, me and my colleagues, we got to know Cody more. We talked more, and what an awesome guy. And we had a select board meeting months later after this meeting, right? About something else, about basically asking for a letter of support to build some trails on some private land that was that's open to the public, shared use hike bike trails, cross some of the ATV trails. We also had built a accessible trail behind that Lumbermen's Museum, and we were looking for ways to connect that better into town. And so, right, we walk into this meeting not knowing what's going to happen. And before I can really even say anything, Cody stands up and just has really good praise for us and the work we've done, the approach we've taken to it. There were members of the community who were there who were concerned that oh, they're going to take away the ATV trails or we can't groom for snowmobiles. And no, we had to put bridges in some instances across ditches, right, where they had ditched for drainage. And so we were very intentional on making sure the bridges were out of the way of the groomers when they were grooming. So, we did a lot, talked to them, and yeah, basically I didn't say anything. This other guy stood up, spoke great for us. Town gave us support. And then he was basically like, hey, we've got this ATV trail coming into downtown. If you use this part of the lumberman's land and we share the last quarter mile, we can get connected into town. It's like, wow, so that's a little story, right, about relationships and planning. And yeah, man, I could tell you, many, many other stories about sort of planning. One thing I'd love to harp on, and this is maybe a little different than the approach I took or we took at IMBA. I'm not sure, what they're doing, but right now, when I'm doing a lot of planning work, right, we're thinking about trail sustainability. Everyone talks about trail sustainability. Hopefully, most people who listen to this podcast could rattle off, right, like the three legs of that trail sustainability stool, right, which we often talk about as environmental sustainability, which is, I think everybody understands at this point, right? Like that's the physical sustainability of the trail, right? Is it eroding? Is it causing, I often talk about it, is it causing impacts we didn't intend to the environment? We can talk about that more when we talk about a certain conference, right? But there's this idea that there's low impact trails, and some of the trails we're building aren't very low impact, right? So environmental sustainability to me, is really about understanding what impacts that trail is going to have, sort of during construction and during its use. And that, thinking about that in terms of all your fun environmental stuff, wildlife, habitat, hydrology, soils. You've got social sustainability. We all know about that. Are people getting in conflicts? Are people enjoying the trail, right? And there's sort of, are people maintaining the trail? There's all of that. The one I really want to just harp on for a second, and I've heard this explained and this is what I want to talk about because I've seen it in some print in some places, and to me it was described poorly and inaccurately. So this is how we look at what we don't call economic sustainability. I've seen it described as bringing tourists to your trail system, and having money for your trails through like tourism, or just like even the fact that economic, makes people think of finances and funding and money, right? And that is, to me, not the core of what that leg of sustainability really is getting at. What it's getting at is capacity and resources. That's what it really means. Funding is just a piece of that. To have a sustainable trail doesn't, like, if I told every community I went to, economic sustainability means bringing in tourism, I get shooed out the door by half these small communities who don't really, give a rat's ass about bringing in tourists. So when we go into communities, when I'm doing planning work, I'm often thinking about what we call capacity. What's your sustainability in terms of capacity? Do you have the skills in your community to maintain these trails? To manage and maintain these trails? Do you have the resources? Like, do you have the tools, the machines or whatever you need? Do you have the support? And funding, of course, is a piece of that. But in a lot of the work I'm doing in Maine, we're going in and we're laying out trail plans, and it's like, hey, nobody here can build or maintain this, right? Like, these are small communities. Nobody necessarily knows how to build, sustainable, high quality single track. We don't have a ton of contractors. Certainly, a lot of our volunteers. A lot of these trails are just above all that now, and so that's a big piece of thinking about that. That sustainability is like, hey, we need to not only, if you just brought in contractors for all this work, we'd get a lot built, but that capacity sustainability, if we don't bring the local people along, if we don't figure out how we're going to manage and maintain these trails as a community, whether that's having some sort of paid crew that's professional and has high quality skills, or it's volunteers, we just need to be thinking about all of that. And so that's a big thing we're doing at OSI when we're doing this planning work for communities.
That's a perfect segue into, I want to go into the PTBA conference.
Yeah.
Here's why. So we're going to jump around a little bit here regarding the PTBA conference. Just to set this one up slightly, you attended your first ever PTBA conference in Georgia this last late winter, early spring, I believe it was March, April. I find it interesting that was your first one. I think you found it interesting that it was your first one, considering you were a trail professional for a bunch of years leading up to that. But one of the presentations you had was developing trails, workforce, and culture in rural Maine. And so I think that dovetails in nicely into what you were just talking about. And I kind of want to go into what trails can mean to the local economy in terms of building a workforce that it actually stays local, that isn't contractors, but that is, people that end up contributing to the local economy, as in like using the grocery stores because they live there, or maybe they don't live there, but they're there for maybe a couple of years. Like, we're not talking in and out, fly by night type of situation. We're talking people that actually become part of the community.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big piece of the work that we do, right? It's like we believe that giving, especially young people, these skills just helps them be more resilient in life. Like, you've got all these professional skills, so you could find a job in trail building per se, but you could also move on, right? And you've got great skills through outdoor sport and all this stuff. But hopefully you've made connections with the people around you, multi-generational connections, right? With all the people in that community, because trails are so multi-generational. And in Maine, that's particularly evident. I think we're the oldest state, on average in the country. And last I checked, I think we're slightly aging. We lose young people and old people retire here. So, right, we're multi-generational. So making those connections, making connections with your landscape. We talk about that a lot in the Katahdin region, where OSI has a particular focus. I mean, this place is freaking beautiful, man. Some of these places that we're working. Shout out one project in particular that I'd love to talk about a little more is in a community called Island Falls, right? And there's just some stunning opportunities right there in that community, for some amazing opportunities, for trails, for everything from, backcountry trails, front country, shared use, great cross country. There's 500 feet of vert. There's these beautiful lakes. That's a great resource. What a great resource for the youth and for the people in that community to be able to like actualize and get connected to that landscape in a deeper way. Of course we've got like Baxter State Park is up there, but that's kind of far from a lot of these communities. So a lot of the work in these communities, is helping people get that attachment, and that connection. So maybe they want to stay and open up a supporting business or something else along those lines that can, help fuel all this work and keeps them in the community, which is such a huge thing. I also want to, quickly point out that like we certainly we're not building everything ourselves. We talked a lot in that presentation at PTBA about diversifying implementation and how important that was, right? And how we're trying to just be very strategic about, where does it make sense to use outside contractors, people who, might be more expensive, but certainly have much higher skills than say our crew. Or where does it make sense to really activate local volunteers? We have a very limited volunteer source, right? 10,000 people scattered over like a couple hours drive and all these, Millinocket's a couple thousand and that's the biggest. So being very strategic about that implementation, is important. Can't say enough, I'll share another quick story about a fella named Coleman. Coleman, hope you're having fun and making me proud out there. Coleman had worked for OSI in a variety of capacities and worked kind of seasonally at some different jobs. I'd been on the trail crew and we had recently had him operating. When we talked to him, his mid-season review, he was really like, man, I really, I want to take this, or I want more, want to do something more. It was like, well, right now we're seasonal. That's kind of the, where we are right now. We're building capacity, helping get some trail built, helping maintain trail, helping grow that youth participation, grow skills. And Coleman just took a job with IMBA. So like, to me, that's a really cool story and like a success story for OSI to be like, oh, wow, like we're helping feed that pipeline. So I think that's really important, even though, in that instance, right, he's out in Arizona, I think right now, it's still awesome to me, to be able to do that. But we've got some awesome folks, Alyssa, she's our crew leader. She's been with us for every season, 3 seasons. She was an intern with OSI. She's awesome, brings high energy to the crew. We've only had a crew for like 3 seasons and pretty much everyone has come back, every season. And then we get some new folks. So I think it's really great. People love, being able to we've been putting a lot of college kids to work and then some young folks who are in college, we're putting them to work they're still out there. We don't have snow on the ground. So they finished up building some bridges and now they're doing some awesome maintenance. And but how cool is that? And we're OSI is certainly like that. That's growing. And so we're looking for opportunities for how do we, grow that and be able to provide, more capacity, right? Hire more people who can live in these communities and help do this work and see this work through and looking at other communities too for that type of work. We've got this awesome vision at OSI that Northern Maine can really be this epicenter for helping grow this type of work, for helping teach people these skills, not just trail building, but, youth programming, how to coordinate organizations and individuals around this work. And so, working all the way across Northern Maine, with aspirations to do this in a lot of places besides the Katahdin region. So
one of the things that, and we're going to go back to a Glenn Jacobs thing quick. One of the things that kind of surprised me with how they operate as a company was they usually roll into a community for 2 or 3 years with their crew.
Yeah.
And I think that like how awesome would that be? So your crew really, like if they have family, their family, like if they have kids, their kids go to school there, they really become part of the community. Like how it just helps the ownership of what they're building be that much more strong, right?
Yeah, no, it's great to see, see our young people who are living in these communities on the trail crew, take a real, none of them are like enthusiast mountain bikers, right? Like we're building a lot of shared use trail. I'm the most enthusiast mountain biker on, right? So, we've got some trail runners, we got people who love hiking, they all like being outside. Yeah, it's really interesting to see them explore the trails, take ownership, be enthusiastic, get excited when they see their community members using the trails. I think it's so important. I think there's a lot of big contract work happening. And I think, as an industry, we'll probably see like a lot more maintenance work happening in the future. And I really hope that land managers and organizations, it's going to take coalition and partnerships. I won't throw it all on land managers, but like having more local people that, have these skills, these professional skills who are able to maintain and manage these trail systems is going to be really vital. And it's going to be so cool to know that, there's people in communities, right? Like shout out to Josh Collins working for the city of Johnson City, right? Like people who have a community who are funding a position to manage and maintain their natural surface trails.
Let's roll back to the PTBA conference. What was that like for you in terms of just the conference in general? Like that's probably the largest concentration of trail builders and planners and designers that you'd been around to date, even though I'm sure you knew a lot more people than you maybe even thought you knew there.
Yeah. First one, I think with IMBA Sorba Summit was probably around there. And like, I got to go to Sorba Summit and had a lot of fun at Sorba Summit. We'll say that, and I'll leave it there. So, first PTBA conference, we used it internally as an excuse to take our bikes south too, because March in Maine, well, we returned in a snowstorm. Let's just say that.
Actually, I did too.
So it was a double whammy on that note. But yeah, man, what a cool networking event, right? Got to bring one of my coworkers, my colleagues, Dan, down, and of course Mike, our ED, came. And so for them, I think it was really sort of enlightening to see all of this. For me, it was like, oh wow, there's a lot of people I know here. So it was just like really good to connect with people, especially in a new role at OSI. It was just fun to remind people that, hey, we're doing some cool work up in this literal corner of the country. So that was really fun. It was fun it's always nice to me to know that you're sort of on the right track, so to hear from so many people about the importance of planning and design, the importance of thinking about sustainability, the importance of engaging community, that stuff was important. It was also really important to sit in on. I know Wimpy was leading it. I can't remember who else was leading that one on the design. I think technology and design. I stepped into that one kind of late. But to just hear people talk about the tools, right? And to talk about Avenza, so many folks are using Avenza. And there were, we all shared some of the similar issues and wants for functionality, and we're finding the same go around sort of. And, there was certainly unique, and people were using different tools. And it's always great to hear about the other things. But to me, it's kind of nice sometimes to hear that, like, oh, okay, yeah. Like I haven't just been making this up.
I think about that all the time.
I think my wife thinks it's made up, but
well, I've said it many times. It's like literally the oldest means of transportation there is, but at the same time, the newest professional industry there is.
Yeah. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, what a way to put it.
Yeah. So one of the presentations you made was with Val Naylor, the infamous Rich Edwards, and Chris Kmeyer. And there is a bunch of symbols in the title of this, and then it said mountain bikers ! And the title of it was Minimizing Visitor Conflict on Shared Use Trail Systems Through Mountain Bike Speed Management. I'm sure that's a very hot topic for a lot of our listeners. And I'd like to just kind of dive into your take on that presentation and maybe some of the feedback you heard either during or after that presentation, because it's a very important topic that we have, right? Especially as usership goes up.
Yeah. Val approached me about that, and I was, again, just like, dang, you guys want me on this team? Wow. So I felt a little like, gosh, sitting here with all the real important folks. But I think that I hear that all the time, right? Like all these small communities I go into, I'm working with a lot of land trusts. There is a lot of concern about visitor conflict with bikes. And so what irrelevant, I think, some of the most feedback I heard around that was really that folks wanted more, right? Like we want to talk about this more. And I think stress enough, and I think it's what we stressed a lot in that presentation, right? Is doing all of those steps and being very intentional from the get-go, right? So if you're going to do a shared use trail, make sure it's in the right place, make sure it's serving the right function, right? Do all the planning, right? Make sure people want it, right? And in that planning, make sure you're laying out guidelines so that the designer, when they pick up that plan, knows, right? Like I'm designing this shared use trail. I need to make sure that the grades are appropriate, the sight lines are appropriate, right? And then the builder, right, can take up that design and maybe go back to that plan even and go, oh yeah, all along the way, we've talked about this trail being for hikers and bikers. And so when I take this flag line, I'm not going to straighten it out. I'm not going to get rid of all the grade reversals or the uphill sections. I'm not going to berm out every turn, right? Because they call for platform turns and slow platform turns or climbing turns, right? Things like that, right? I'm not going to throw, right? Like, so it's so important for, to me, that's stage one, right? And then we also heard a lot about just this need, like there's a lot of existing trails out there that are shared use. That they might not be up to spec, so to speak, even though it's not a spec. But you're right, they're not meeting those sustainability goals. And on top of that, just use patterns have changed, bike technology has changed, right? Like things have just been changing. So even if they were like a contour alignment some volunteers built 10 years ago, it might not be working today, even though it worked on 10-year-old bikes, right? In a 10-year-old setting with, that amount of use 10 years ago, right? We're seeing more use on trails. And so, yeah, I think that was a big thing we heard too, was like a lot of like, gosh, how do we fix existing trails where we have these conflicts? And, some of I think Rich Edwards would probably say, sight lines. Do what it's so important with your management to be cutting out those sight lines. And they're not always right up and down the trail, right? Like they might be off trail. So they might be between the bends and the meanders. So you can get a glimpse of someone, because when it comes down to it, that visitor conflict, we talked about speeds, but really what it comes down to is, goal interference, people out there for different reasons, and you're getting surprised, you're getting spooked, and your experience is getting interrupted, diminished. You have a negative, whatever, and boom, that is certainly a piece of it. And so, I think it's really important to be talking about this, because this is on my notes. I had this in my notes, talking about sort of shared use trails, because I can't tell you how many communities I walk into where it's like, I want a mountain bike trail, or we don't want mountain bike trails. And you're like, okay, well, first off, there's like no such thing unless we're literally talking about like some directional downhill, right? Like that is a mountain bike trail. The rest of the stuff, that's some sort of shared use trail. I think this gets into another piece of like things I've thought about a lot and bounced ideas off with folks like Mr. Edwards and others. Shout out to Adam Wrights, who we geek out about all night. Had many a garage beer this summer, just chatting with him for hours about trails and like trail theory and this stuff. We've even taken this into some of the education we're doing at OSI, is like trying to get people on this level speaking field when we're talking about trails. And this idea that, and I think the Forest Service does an awesome job of it. And so I always tell people I appreciate sort of when there's a process, but like, there's really only one designed use for a trail. And then you've got all these managed uses. So I talk about that a lot when I step into communities at a planning level, right? Like, hey, we can design trails for certain users, and then we can ensure that in that design, they are managed for multiple users. And this is really big in Maine. I talked about earlier, I do a lot of trail assessment. right? And this is so common. You walk into a land trust, and this is partially, I know you want to talk about, I think, New England, right? And like there has been a long time sort of preservationist attitude in New England, which, you know, is great in a lot of ways. I mean, there's been some awesome work done here around conservation and this sort of work. But like there's this notion that we want low impact, primitive feeling. We want trails to feel natural. And you're like, okay, but like there's like 100 and there's like tens of thousands of people around here and they all want to use that trail. So I so often come back to, you talked about like, right, like this is old, this is transportation. You know, I talk a lot about how we can take lessons from like transportation world, right? And like, so we classify our roads, right? Like there's, and the Forest Service classifies trails. And so I talk to a lot of communities about this idea of levels of trail development, right? Like there's levels of development and primitively developed trails, i.e. rake and ride. We didn't do anything but, you know, cut the branches out of the way and cut the logs that were down. That type of like trail that's like neither good nor bad. I'm not going to pass judgment on it. It's only good or bad. You know, it's bad if it's in the wrong situation. And often it is, right? It's in places where it shouldn't be. It's in places that see lots of use. And you wouldn't put a dirt road as like the, you know, you wouldn't build the interstate like you would a dirt road, right? And so, which is hard for people to hear. It's hard, I think, for some of these, especially like some of these land trusts that might work with, or these small municipalities where people have a vision and an idea of the character they want their property to have. And it's like, it's very difficult, as we've talked about so often, right? To like, I always tell people, you have to manage the use, right? And so like, if you're just like, if you're open to the public and you have a lot of people coming out, you have to think about a higher level of development of your trail. You need a more robust trail. You know, I think that all goes back to that design speed and social conflict type stuff, because yeah, a lot of our trails, a lot of our existing trails are just like, they're off in some way, right? Like we did not put the thought into the planning and design that we should have. And sometimes it's hard to tell the future, but we need to be thinking about that. So a lot of the work, you know, I'm doing in communities in Maine is thinking a lot about shared use, because we're bound to have more people, right? But I know we talked about this in the first episode, is pockets of single use, right? And like hub and clusters. And so using these more progressive trail system approaches, techniques, you know, even in the assessment work that I'm doing, right? Like how going in and assessing trails and making recommendations about consolidating intersections, you know, diversifying trail experiences. You often get that too when you just have this simple level, everything's primitively developed. It all feels like rake and ride, right? You know, I bring that up because so often I go into land trusts like the trail's widening, we have trail braiding, you know, and you're like, well, yeah, you've got like thousands of people who want to use this every year, like tens of thousands. Like it's very hard to keep this very primitive path. You have to work very, very hard to keep it that way. You know, instead, let's build something that's a little more robust and you know, more appropriate for the level of use that you're seeing. You know, and going back to design to manage use, you know, because Maine is young, right? And like we don't have a whole lot of stuff to look at. And a lot of these communities, like it's not like people travel the way I've been given the opportunity to travel per se. And so they might not know everything. Like you can't know it till you see it or you're on it, right? And so, you know, sometimes these land trusts have an idea that even a bike optimized piece of single track has, you know, tons of rollers and roller doubles and berms. And it's like, well, you know, no, maybe like it depends, you know, where do we want to turn that dial? You know, we can still design it for bikes, make sure the grades are appropriate, the turn radii are appropriate, all that stuff so that you can use a bike on it. We don't have to make it like super bikey. We don't have to like scare all your hikers away. You know, it can feel like what we'd call traditional, you know, like kind of, it feel like sort of the trails you have, right? Like that's what I'm always telling land trusts, like we could build a trail that feels and sort of looks like what you have, but is better and has drainage and is appropriate for hikers and bikers.
Yeah, I think that's an area that people miss, is that And I've had it especially recently when you put the terms bike optimized into a report, they automatically spin to like, this is a gravity bike park and everyone's yelling sick, bro. And that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell a lot of land trusts, these like bike optimized trails, they're actually much more accessible than like if we were just designing a trail for hiking, right? Like a beginner and easiest green circle bike optimized trail. Like you sort of look at the general specs of something like that, right? Like it's wide, it's smooth, it's gentle. Those are all characteristics of like a more accessible trail. The texture is low, the trail rugosity is low. So yeah, and you can certainly turn that dial up, right? And you can make stuff very bike optimized. And that might be when you really want to think about the design and managed uses, just bikes. And so, yeah, I think that is just like, it's very common. I think it's only going to be more common. I think that's the sexy stuff. That's what you see in social media, right? So I always, have these like concerns that as a, hate to call us an industry, as a community of trail builders and users and maintainers and managers, all the trail people out there. I sort of have concerns sometimes when everyone wants bike, 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 and even, it seems like trail managers have in some ways become some of the ones I know and or I've worked with or seen, right? Not worked with, but know of projects happening. Like they're more open to what the community wants than maybe 10 years ago, which I think we should approach all of this with caution, because like I see trail going in that might not be, might not be the right trail in the right place for that community. And often it's because like, yeah, let's turn the dial up on bikes a lot, and it's like, whoa. I still like every community I go into, I'm like, look, the vast majority of use on almost any trail system here in the state of Maine is going to be pedestrians, right? It's going to be walkers and hikers. It's what most people do. We're certainly trying to build more fun stuff for bikes. In the Katahdin region, we finished this awesome. The trail's called flowage, which is a term in Maine for like a very slow moving lake. A flowage. There's a particular one you cross as you come into Millinocket called the Dolby flowage, and it's just like it looks like you're crossing a big sort of lake, shallow lake. But it's a bike only. Descent, gravity flow trail for kids from basically ties like a residential area down to the schools, so there's still that stuff happening, but shared use is going to be so important.
Well, and I think you nailed it when you talked about grades and like turning radiuses. Like those are probably two of the most important factors of whether or not a bike can fit on it. And I mean, especially from a turn radius perspective. Yeah. And and I've been fighting with the term bike optimized too. Like, how do we not make it sound, because it kind of sounds aggressive and it's not intended to be an aggressive term unless we are talking truly directional bike park specific stuff. And that is that single use.
Yeah. That's where I really come back to, hey, designed use is bike, managed use is bike, equestrian, whatever. Like the bike is sort of the limiting factor in those design specifications. That's what's going to limit, the grade. That's what's going to limit the turn radius. It's not the hiker.
Hikers can pivot pretty quick and they can go up and down stairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bikes can go downstairs, but they don't typically go up them.
Yeah. Not, I know some people who do, but right. Like, yeah, not, not the stairs we build in Maine anyway. But that also comes back to that where I've talked to communities about like, yeah, maybe there are some short sections of steps on this trail and it's really like it's a hiker optimized trail, but you're okay managing bikes on that. You're okay allowing bikes. And it also comes back, right? Social conflict and just all that stuff, comes back to making sure we're informing visitors well, right? So like if someone thinks they're getting into a very bike optimized sort of trail and they're on, some old traditional single track that's more like, for hikers, but like, around here, right, in Maine, like the land trust doesn't mind if you ride a bike on it per se, but it's not really built for bikes. You might be disappointed, right? So managing folks' expectations, I think, is pretty important for land managers and communities to think about, which, really comes back a lot to signage.
Well, let's go into the Maine Land Conservation Conference, and then we're going to get into your details of what you have specifically going on in Maine. But you were part of a panel that was titled, "When is Conservation Not Conservation?"
Yeah. Took every ounce of me, I think, on the one call to be like, that's a loaded title, y'all. Yeah, I got invited. So I grew up in New England, right? I think I can safely say that I know and understand and have been around the attitudes that a lot of people have had in New England, especially land managers, landowners, toward mountain biking in particular, and toward really what I would just say is like sort of modern, progressive, contemporary trail stuff. And when I took the role at OSI, it was kind of like a personal focus, and it was a work focus, right? To just like, how do we work with land trusts more, and how do we have maybe more influence in that realm? Not because I just want trails everywhere. I certainly I fully respect I'm a big proponent of conservation and all this other work.
And preservation.
Preservation. That's a good work. That's a part of good trail planning, right? And that's what we got out in that conference. So anyway, I always wanted an audience, so to speak. And lo and behold, like we had done some work. We had started to do some work with the land trust, and this panel was being put together for this big conference. So I hadn't even really done the work, but this woman spoke up when she saw this panel and was like, hey, basically it's sort of loaded with people who might not have the best things to say about recreation. Why don't we get someone on the panel who at least, maybe has, even if they have a little bias toward recreation, which I'd say I probably do, comes off a little more non-biased, hopefully unbiased. It was this year, dude. Time flies. It was in April.
It was after the PTBA conference, if I remember.
It was after PTBA, yeah. And so really, I just tried to make some really key points when I had my 15 minutes to speak. And we had a pretty packed room. It was the only one you were supposed to sign up for every session. And it was the only one that was signed up for immediately. It was a hot topic. We had people, it was at a high school. They were just standing classroom is pretty full. And I was after some of the folks, they're wildlife biologists, they're environmental scientists, and they had concerns about just increased use, really. And I think they placed a unnecessary amount of frustration maybe on mountain bikes. But if anything, I would say they were probably frustrated about seeing more use and more of a push for recreation, which is just a trend happening right now. 40 years ago when these land trusts started, it was a lot about conservation and preservation and maybe a little primitive hiking trail because only 12 people went out there to go bird watching or whatever, right? So the points we tried to get across and the points I got across as OSI was hey, just that, right? We have more use. We can't control it. It's going to be very hard to control it anyway, right? We can't control the fact that more people want to go outside. In fact, I would say as conservationists, as recreationalists, this is great. I'm ecstatic that more people want to go recreate outside. I think there's so many benefits from that. But what I also made a really big point of talking about was yes, there are impacts, and it would be silly to ignore those. And in fact, we don't ignore those. Professionals do not ignore those impacts. Now, some of the impacts, she tried to bring up, this in particular, I will blame on the mountain bike industry because she was pulling all these YouTube videos of people riding in mud and, rutting stuff up and all this.
And maybe Red Bull Rampage.
Yeah, and it's okay, well, that's not the reality, right? And so, going back to a point I made earlier just now, right? You can have unmanaged recreation and you can have managed recreation. So I really threw it back at all these land trusts that hey, and this isn't how some people I think try to frame this sometimes where it's well, mountain bikers are building illegal trails, so you better build them a bunch of trails. It's well, that's not necessarily what that means. It does mean you need to talk to them and you need to figure this out. Like this needs to be figured out because, you can go on letting them do whatever they want to do. And I can tell you right now, the Maine Warden Service has like so many better things to do than track down mountain bikers, riding their bikes places that you didn't want them to. So you can either, let that go unmanaged or you can manage it. And that resonated with a lot of people. The other big point was like planning and design, like will mitigate most of these issues. Like, basically what I said is like, your point is sort of moot because all of this stuff you're talking about is on like crappy old things that I would tell you as a trail professional need to go away and be replaced with something better. So, of course there's impact from those trails. Those trails suck. Let's do something better. Let's fix them, right? And so I was definitely like a little nervous. I didn't stack the room, but I reached out to a couple friends I knew in the land trust industry. I'm like, can you like join this like audience? Because like I don't want to get just like put up there and just like blown away. Because that's what I kind of thought would happen. And instead, there's a lot more, I'd say like sort of young and maybe progressive people getting involved in the conservation world. And so like there was just a lot of like, yeah. There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. Some people tried to, mountain bikers this or that, and finally at one point a fella from the state who works for our Bureau of Parks and Land, which, is like the one who manages our state parks and everything. Basically it was like, hey now, there's good or bad everything, right? Like sometimes dog walkers don't pick up their dog shit and, sometimes the guy in the snowmobile throws his beer can and sometimes the mountain biker rides where they shouldn't ride. But there's that in that's just people. That's humans. There's bad apples everywhere. We can't single out user groups. And so it was just nice to hear all that support that like, oh, okay, like we don't hate mountain bikers anymore. And we all agree that like, when I talked about like, hey, we have a lot of legacy trails, like the environmental impacts that you're talking about have nothing to do with use. They have everything to do with that trail's in the wrong place and was built poorly. A lot of people, I won't say bad, a lot of people in the room were like, oh yeah, that's true. And we've been getting a lot of calls from land trusts. There's this awesome project locally with the Georges River Land Trust at this place called the Rockland Bog. So I'm gonna take a second to give a little history lesson on Steve. Like I've been coming up to this part of Maine my whole childhood. We have a family cabin 20 minutes away on a pond. And so when I got like, old enough to come up here on my own and I was riding bikes, like college, I'd come up usually for like a week in the summer and stay at the family camp. And I remember going to the bike shop, which is still there, Side Country Sports down in Rockland, Maine. And I was like, hey, where's some places to ride? And they're like, well, you go out to the bog. And I drove out Bog Road and I parked where I now know I wasn't supposed to park. But like this was like 14, 13 years ago, right? At least a dozen years ago. And I went out and this was before Trail Forks, before I used Strava. The first ride I took out there, I definitely didn't Strava. And I got batshit lost, man. And every ride I've ever done at the bog, and there's this group of locals called the Bubbas, which is a main thing, right? Some cool guys, and I've a couple in particular I know. And like every time I've gone to the bog, I just get lost, dude. Like, and I fancy myself very savvy with like navigation in the woods and knowing where I am. Like you do the job, right? Like we spend a lot of time just like in the woods and like I've had people tell me like, wow, like you like kind of know where you are. And I'm like, well, yeah, I look at maps a lot and like I just look at landscapes a lot. And so like I just get used to like doing that. Anyway, the bog has always been this black hole that like I just get freaking lost in, dude. It's just like all this, like there's a lot of ledge and bedrock and like there is a bog, but what people call the bog is like thousands of acres of land around an actual bog. But it's all like low lying with like pocket wetlands and weird streams and hydrology and just like the weird coastal geology we have. And anyway, I got to do a planning project for the land trust that recently acquired some land there the city of Rockland owns some land. There's a lot of unique kind of landowners, but yeah, how cool. Like to me, it's just a cool thing. Like if you ask the kid on that red line D440, 12 years ago, hey man, do you ever think that like someone would pay you to like walk around here and think about, like, I wasn't even thinking about that. Yeah, I was just going out in the woods and having a good time. And I certainly did. I love getting lost, so that was fun. And yeah, just a cool. Actually, there's a couple stories like that now that I live in Maine that just really make me reflect, on myself. But yeah, I mean that bog is a cool opportunity too. We got to basically assess this historic. There's this long distance trail, and 7 miles of it crosses through the bog, and so we got to assess this. It's been around for 30 or 40 years. This like footpath, and really help make a actionable plan for fixing that up, as well as look at all these new opportunities. And there's some cool opportunities, and just to be able to bring a significant sort of amount of single track. I think we talked about 20 to 30 miles potentially in there, close to the city of Rockland, which there's one point where the city owns what's called Benner Hill. And so you're up on this ridge line, and it's just beautiful slab, dude. Like, I mean, and we should talk about a couple other projects, but like this, just like nice open bedrock slabs in places, mostly hardwood forest. But you're looking out at the Rockland breakwater, which is this nearly mile-long jetty that ends in a lighthouse that protects the Rockland Harbor. And to me, it's just like, holy moly, like how cool is this? Like, and it's like a 300-foot descent you get on that property, and then you could continue to just scoot along on the road and be in downtown Rockland, in 10 minutes or something.
So I always learn things from your posts. And one of the things that I learned of recently, and I honestly, like, some people might laugh at this, but I didn't know what it was. And I had to look it up after you posted it, was penstock. I'm like, oh, yeah. That's a freaking huge wooden pipe, man. And so then I had to look into the history of what penstock actually is and what it's used for, because we don't have those in the Midwest, at least as far as I know.
That was wild. I mean, that's a good example of just a small project, the Messalonsky Stream. Just got brought in to do a quick assessment, and offer some recommendations. But yeah, what cool little history. I mean, that thing just like, it weaves and it's just like meanders along, and it's got to be like 12, 15 feet in diameter. And there's all these holes in it. So the water was just like out of the top. I mean, like, that thing is under wicked pressure, like when the water's squirting out, right? Like a couple feet out of a hole in the top. And all I could think, we're walking along it, and I'm with this older gentleman who's awesome, John, who I worked with on a previous project, which is why he brought us into this project. He's a former mechanical engineering professor, and he actually worked at Penn State, my alma mater. And what a nice guy. He and his wife, they're fantastic, Barb. But I'm like, John, you ever get scared that this thing's just gonna burst open? Because I've never thought about it. I'm like, dude, I'm like, what if this thing just broke while we're walking along it? We would just get washed away to, God knows where. But yeah, there's a lot of cool projects going on. I don't know if you want me to talk about projects.
Yeah, we can go.
You got questions?
I got a project.
Ask questions, man.
I got a project, and maybe you have it on your list, but IMBA about a week ago released a video from Monson, Maine with Val Naylor.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that project.
Yeah, we can talk about Seven Ponds. What a project. This is one of those ones that you definitely, to me, right, as a trail planner, kind of pinch myself. This is, privately owned, almost 10,000 acres in rural Piscataquis County, Maine, which there's all these amazing stats that could be told about Piscataquis County. And this foundation, the Elliottsville Foundation, named after Elliottsville Township, where this property is located. Their director, Lucas St. Clair, their recreation managers, Susan and Mark Adams, fantastic folks, and we actually, OSI is working with EFI on a property in Patton, Maine, where I talked about earlier, that was the property we were getting the letter of support for. They own 300 acres up in Patton, Maine. And so our OSI crew has spent actually the last 2 seasons building trail there, which is a great spot for the youth crew to be building trail. It's going to be a small community trail system. Seven Ponds is not just going to be a small community trail system, most likely. It stands a chance to really be a showcase and a model and a destination. And, one of the biggest things I critique, I think, people on in sort of quote unquote this professional industry, right? This community of ours, or at least new trail builders, a lot of times, right? Or trail designers, so like you can't do what you want to do, right? Like that's not being professional. That's being, that's having a hobby. Being professional means you do what you get paid to do. Now, luckily, most of us just love this work, right? And so, like, I love the challenges. I love being a part of projects that might not have a big bike focus. Most of my projects have biking as a part of them, but this certainly speaks to something that I love and have been very excited about seeing happen, which is big backcountry single track experiences accessible for bikes. We have some of that. Like you can actually ride most of the trails in the White Mountain National Forest. I'd argue some of those trails are pretty darn busy. And also, they're very rugged, right? There's certainly, and then Vermont has some cool remoter trails, but like this is a really cool opportunity. I mean, to talk about when I was with IMBA, and I can't say enough great things, right, about Elliottsville Foundation, EFI, and IMBA. And I'll talk about a little bit about, I think, all the work that's happened, but, very thankful to both organizations. And it's a fun to still be a part of this project. Just so thankful. But when I was with IMBA doing the planning, and Liz Grades and I, shout out to her, she's still rocking with IMBA. Her and I went out to do this initial planning. I mean, this was probably the most remote planning. I just did a project that is probably rivals it in terms of just remoteness. But I remember having a field day where we drove in. I hadn't thought about camping, but we decided, we could probably take it on and day trips. We left early, had to go down the paved road out. We had to drive out toward Greenville, hop on this forest road, a logging road, gated logging road. We had to get the key. This was a big deal, called the Bob Young Road. We drove the Bob Young Road for a couple miles of gravel till it dead ended at this property. And then we got out, and essentially we had done that a couple times. But the day before, right, like the Bob Young Road teed into the property on the far western property line, but not like halfway, right? And so like more southern. And so the day before I had like tackled the zone of hiking around. And then that day I had to tackle the zone north of that. So I had to bushwhack through the zone that I had looked at the day before just to get to the zone I wanted to get to that day. And that was 15 miles on foot that day, and it was like, you're out there, you're freaking out there, it was like, oh my goodness. And so some of these trail segments on the property's a little broken up, and, where we're working right now, obviously is, close to roads, close to trailheads, so everything that I'm talking about, is years away, right? Like, I mean, maybe not 20 years away, but probably 5 years away at least, right? But some of those segments could be, I think in the plan, we had like 7 or 8 mile long segments between intersections, right? Like point to point. And to get to that, right, you would have to have traversed like 12, 15 miles of single track to get to one of those endpoints of one of those remote segments. So we looked at opportunities certainly for places to camp, so I think this is the sort of trail system that could entice backpackers going back, like, to talk about design to manage use, right? Like the idea here is all of this is designed for bikes, right? Like, so it's very accessible, but still, we're allowed, like a lot of this is shared use in these big backcountry loops. Like, why not? Of course they could be shared use. So you've got these backpacking opportunities, but you've got these bike packing opportunities on single track, on like a closed loop sort of system. How cool would that be? So, the property is like, I've probably looked at more remarkable properties, right? Like in general, there's just like a big, like 8,000 acres of it is very flat. There's no significant topographic, features. It's not like you can get long gravity runs. The slope. Maine is just like, where the glaciers have gone through. We have very low slopes. I work at a lot of places where I'm like, you do a slope analysis and it's like everything's under 10%. Everything, or at least 20%. So, there's lots of like wetlands, but what you will get is like some cool opportunities to just like really get out there, which is like, it's something that always drew me to mountain biking. It's a big piece of the experience that I really like is just being out there, being away from it all. And so I'm really excited at that opportunity. Currently we've got 1.4 miles Val built. Plans are to have him come back next year and hopefully Val and finish out phase one, which would be about 4 miles. So there'd be 5.5 miles. OSI's been talking with Elliottsville about flagging out a phase, essentially like a phase 2, 3. So trying to get the design so we can go after funding for like another 11 miles of trail, which would really build out around a new trailhead, which we're also looking at developing. So yeah, and they've got some campsites there, so it's a really great spot. It's already a recreation zone. The Wilson little Wilson Trail connects to the AT there. So like some people come out to hike that side trail and go up to the falls. People come out there to kind of camp, but this is certainly going to add to it. It's unorganized territory, going back to, that talk about that earlier, right? It's like, it's off the beaten path. It's outside of the town of Monson, but it certainly, when you think about the opportunity for the mileage, right? And the quality of that mileage and the amenities, like really good trailheads, potential campsites in the backcountry, that sort of stuff. To me, that's really exciting stuff. So, I mean, I'm just thrilled. I'm always excited when IMBA's in town. When I was with them, we got to do some great work in Millinocket, and I'm really excited that they're building over here in Elliottsville because, it's putting down some really good trail for people to see. It's going to be a great place to bring folks and show people what high quality single track looks like. And it's just fun to continue to kind of partner with IMBA, again, to talk to Liz Chrisman, marketing, and hanging out and talking with Thomas, folks that, were there when I was there. So just really appreciate that opportunity to keep those relationships and partnership alive. And then, man, Elliottsville and Lucas and Susan and Mark, for all they've done and for this opportunity, it's awesome, and this could be something really cool, that could definitely help put Maine more on the map.
Throw out a project that you have on your list. Cause I have, I basically I scoured your
Yeah.
Instagram page.
Oh man, I'll try to hit a couple. There's a lot of good work in Maine, so I'd love to throw out a couple of projects because I'd love to entice people to think about Maine as a place to, either come live. Like I said, we could use young people.
I know
work.
a couple of young people that are moving there. Well, I guess they're maybe more middle-aged now. They're in their 30s and going into 40.
That's considered young here in the state, man. Don't worry.
I got a couple neighbors that just bought a house there and they'll be moving there yet next year. So the population's going up.
There you go. Yeah, I'll give a quick shout out because I think this is kind of neat. Working with Loon Echo Lamb Trust in the Lakes region of Maine, which is this dead zone. I always like dead zones, trail deserts. Matt, fantastic. He's a rider, so it's like it's really showcasing, hey, times are changing. We've got people who do some of these things, and not to say that Matt's just like, oh, we're gonna build a bike park. It's like, no. And it's like but just like, he understands it and appreciates that. And for certain, I mean, the focus of this project, Rolf Hill, was to bring some bike optimized trail and some directional trail because there is like a, not just a lack of trails, but certainly a big lack of mountain bike trails in this area. And it's just a cool project I wanted to shout out because, going back to the land trust stuff and all that, there's this program in Maine Natural Resources Conservation Program, and in lieu fee of, I think, for wetland disturbance, one of those types of programs. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, as you can tell. I just know what I need to know about it. But anyway, it provided funding for some of this acquisition, and so they also did some, I think, wetland restoration, and so they needed to submit like their plan to at the state level, the Nature Conservancy and DEP manage it, but it also gets kicked up to Army Corps, and this was probably, I think this was probably new to a lot of those folks, and so everybody was like, okay, what's going to come back for comments, and MNRCP lays out what they want for recreation, and rightfully so. Most of it's about protecting hydrologic resources, wetlands, riparian areas, streams, all that good stuff. So I, took all that criteria and talked about how we met it or where we might want a waiver, which was, we want to put a bridge in across a stream, and so it's like, yeah, we're going to have some impacts, but we'll file for the permit and, do all that stuff. Anyway, we got got it back and it was like, yeah, it's all good. The only things were make sure you get your stream permit and make sure, use appropriate BMPs to reduce sedimentation. Yeah. Wow. So I just think it's very cool because of that. And it's also like, it's a 300-foot elevation property, and so bringing some bike optimized gravity trail that's a little over an hour, I think, from Portland and our metro area is very awesome. So it's, I'm very excited for that project because it's one of those, it's not huge. It's 300 acres, like I said, a couple hundred feet of elevation, but it's just got the classic things Maine has, beautiful slabs and some cliffs and boulders. So we have really, to me, dynamic and fun terrain to build, especially bike optimized stuff. And of course, like we've talked about this whole time, there's a whole bunch of shared use. And so this is just a great opportunity to like do it right, show people that we can share trails, so show people that these planning design techniques, drawing hikers this way and riders this way, giving good accessible beginner options, all this good stuff works. So that's an exciting one to me. One I do want to throw out is one I mentioned earlier, Island Falls. I didn't dive too deep into that one, but I'll set you up with a quick story of how we got involved there. So we had funding in the Katahdin region, basically, that allowed me to do community planning. So it was really nice to be able to go to some of these communities that are only a couple hundred people, and instead of being like, do you have money to pay for a trail plan? It was like, hey, we've got some funding. Let's do a trail plan. We're not bringing funding to do all the design and construction, but let's jumpstart this. And we did this in Island Falls because they had reached out, and Island Falls, Teddy Roosevelt used to go up there, right? And so it's got this awesome historic piece to it. I think some might argue, I think in some of the books, it talks about how sort of that conservation ethic kind of came from hanging out with people like Bill Sewell, who's, the Sewell family still has a presence in Island Falls. So it's a cool community. Exit 276. So we're keep going up I-95 headed north. We're actually in Aroostook County at this point, but very southern Aroostook County. Two beautiful lakes, Mattawamkeag Lake and Pleasant Lake in this town. And, just a vacation community for the most part. There's motorized stuff. They want to do this. There's a landowner who owns a whole bunch of land who has a strip of land and the town owns some land, and they want to build a lake-to-lake trail. And they're picturing a hiking trail. They want to build a trail that connects the two lakes because there's not a lot of public access on either lakes. I don't think there's any on Pleasant. There is a boat launch on Mattawamkeag. So we walk into this meeting, talk about this idea. And, and I always, right, this so often happens, someone's like, we want to do this thing. And I'm often like, well, hey, let's take a step back. Is this thing even the right thing to do? so often people are like, I want to do this. We'll call it a demonstration project. And you're like, well, it's really useful to do the planning that identifies the demonstration project, not just do a project and hope that it demonstrates something, right? So, I'm like, again, meeting people there, asking questions, and would be happy to help support folks if it makes sense, right? However, we can, but like I was like, oh, like you own some of this other land. Is there an opportunity to take this chance, especially with funding, to think about more trails? Think about a trail system, not just one trail, right? Because like one trail is probably not going to have all the impact we hope it would have. And the town manager just like, as if it was nothing at all. It's like, oh yeah, well, because I was like, oh, well, how much land do you own? She's like, oh, 9,000 acres. And I'm just like, 9,000 acres? And the conversation went on, and Yada, the town manager, she's amazing. There's another fellow in the meeting, Tony, who's a former selectman. Tony has been indispensable in this project and is such a great fellow to hang out with out in the woods up there. So really appreciate Tony's help on this, right? And so me and Mike are sitting there, Tony and the others sitting there. And, I brought it up, I think, I was like, 9,000 acres? By the end of the, sort of near the end, she's like, is that surprising? Is that an issue? And I was like, no, I've just never heard of a town owning 9,000 acres. Like, we just talked about 10,000 acres that Elliottsville owns, right? So this is just shy of that. And essentially, I was like, can we do trail planning on like all of it? And they're like, well, yeah, like we own it now. So, one of the first things I did was like, well, we need to meet with your consulting forester. Like, that is like, because this is it's not just like they own 9,000 acres and it just sits around. This is Maine. And they cut trees down and make money off of it and let trees grow back. And, and people hunt on it. And there's some motorized trails that cross it. We met. So I pull up, and again, this is one of these meetings where I'm like, oh gosh, this is like, got to have my A game on, got to be, let's see what we can get out of these folks. Because I was just very concerned, right? Because there's certainly, again, not even, I would say, a reality, like going back to this idea of like conservation folks not enjoying recreation. I think it's more of a perception at this point that, forestry and recreation don't get along. And there's certainly still, people have bias and there's issues and yada, yada, yada. But like, I roll up and I'm concerned that these foresters are going to be like, you want to put trails here? No. Like, or like, go ahead, we'll crush them. We want to take the tree. And I really want to approach this like, well, where are you logging? Like, let's be system. And one young guy in particular hops out of the Huber truck. There's a big consulting forester in the state of Maine. Multiple roads named the Huber Road. We name all our logging roads, and there's a couple Huber roads. Anyway, this fella comes over, and he's ecstatic. Like, he knows about the work we've done down in Hammond Ridge, which is the bulk of the single track that's been built in Millinocket, right, is out of Hammond Ridge. So he knows about that. He rides bikes. He's, younger. He's got teenage kids. They're active. Like, they ski, they hike, they mountain bike. He lives the next town over. He would love to have trails this close so he didn't have to go to places like Millinocket, which is, over an hour, but Hammond Ridge is over an hour from Island Falls. So yeah, just, and ever since then we've had, lots of meetings, and it's just been very fun to sit down with folks. And so, yeah, I mean, this 9,000 acres, of course, I mean, as a trail planner, not all of that is feasible and usable terrain, especially in Maine. There's like large expanses of that. It's just like wetlands. And it's not one big parcel, it's multiple parcels. So there's like this beautiful 150 and 450 acre parcel that's connected by that large private landowner I mentioned earlier. And so between those two, and there's 500 feet of elevation on the one property. We're working with the town. We're helping them and some others design like a little recreation area for a hand carry boat launch and a little picnic area. But, we've been planning out multiple trailheads. I mean, this is, again, there's this plan for like what could be a destination. We're starting locally. We have identified a demonstration project, and we're getting to work. But like, there's a gravity zone. We've even talked about glading out some of the hillside for skiing because we're far enough north and it's a nice north facing aspect. So very accessible sort of glade network. We've talked about some very accessible cross country skiing. And, there's one part, the biggest part, those couple small parcels, but the bulk of that, couple thousand acres, you drive out this gravel road that is 6 miles. So, I mean, it's a pretty significant drive, it's logging road. And that just gets you all the way out. And then you've still got a couple miles you can go into the woods, right? And so all along that road, basically propose, well, a series of loops that offer backcountry experiences that can get you out to those very remote spots that, the road is 6 miles, but by the time you take the trail out of downtown, it would be like 18 to 20 miles to the furthest point out, and again, talking about, oh, do we put like a campsite out there? Do we put a lean-to or something? And so trying to diversify those experiences, make that more accessible to now you don't have to go to Baxter if you want to go backpacking. You don't have to drive all the way to the state park. So Island Falls is definitely up there as a really exciting project. Can I throw out one more?
Yeah. This is awesome.
No one wants to listen to me talk for this long. So I'll pick one out of my massive list, which is another local one. And that is Ragged Mountain. There's the Camden Snow Bowls on there, the Ragged Mountain Recreation Area. And so Ragged Mountain is just a couple miles. It's part of the reason that we moved to Midcoast Maine, or I really enjoy Midcoast Maine, is it is second to Acadia, the tallest mountains right here on the eastern seaboard. Like, you start heading south from Maine and you no longer have elevation next to the ocean. You get down to South Carolina and Florida, right? And no. But here we've got 1,200, 1,300 foot tall mountains, essentially mere miles from the coastline. And those mountains, because of the glaciers in our landscape, right? They just have the beautiful summits of expansive open bedrock and ledge in a lot of cases. And the Snow Bowl is a place, again, it's one of those places that Side Country Sports sent me back in the day, and it is probably the same as it was 12 years ago when I first rode it. And it is known for just chewing you up and spitting you out. The climb is called Keel Haul. They've all got these marine themes, sort of, right? And it's a ski area. It's a town-owned ski area. It's not a bike park. It has not been managed that way. It's mostly volunteer built. It does build volunteer built trails. And that's just a small piece of the mountain. It's a very skinny piece. The Ragged Mountain itself, there's 2,000 acres around it that is either owned by a land trust or they've got easement on Maine Water Company property. And so, you've got this big, awesome, there's about 1,000 feet of usable vert, on that 1,200 foot tall mountain. That is I'm sure people who live out west, 1,000 feet isn't a lot, or even in Virginia, right? It's but for being next to the ocean, I think that's a lot. And yeah, we got looped in with the town. We've been working with them doing some planning. I'm going to take this moment to take a shout out that, because I know we want to talk about, I think, some cool stuff happening in Maine, but there was another thing that happened that didn't get as much press as this latest thing, which was the Community Outdoor Recreation Assistance Grant. That was ARPA money put out by our Office of Outdoor Recreation, CORA. And this CORA funding is funding a whole bunch of cool planning and design work that a lot of people are doing, but OSI is doing. So a bunch of these projects, we started doing the planning here at the Snow Bowl, and we were focused on that town-owned land and putting together a good master plan. All of a sudden, we have funding to design phase one and help the town put together an RFP for phase one, as well as the land trust reached out to us, and now we're going to go through a planning exercise with them to look at not just that 2,000 acres, but you drop down to a road, State Route 17, which is the road right outside my window here, and up the other side is Spruce Mountain. And so there's a couple hundred acres over there, I believe. And that's another big, tall mountain with these beautiful open, summits. And the Snow Bowl, it's just it's storied sort of in Maine mountain biking history. There's Camden Hills, the high school team has some great racers on it, and they race there. They've been state champs many times. We don't have NICA here, but like we do have some high school racing. And actually, I got to go on a ride with them this summer, and it's like, it's always scary when you show up and all the 18-year-old boys, none of them have knee pads or water bottles. And you're like, hey, you guys are going to toast me, aren't you? And they took me to the summit and they took me down a trail that, is there. Again, this is a place where there's not a lot of like prime management and there needs to be more management. That's why we're going through this process. And man, it is unreal. I think riding some of these open slabs, you're looking out at Camden Harbor. It's this beautiful, picturesque little Maine harbor. It's like, vacation land summed up on a postcard, right? You actually got the state park across the way, which has the 1,300-foot tall Mount Maguntacook, which is just an awesome place to hike up to. But like, so it's just like this awesome feeling. I mean, these slabs, like there's one slab there that is I don't know if I'll ever have the cojones to roll it. It is probably looks like about 300 feet of vert. And the high school kids were like, yeah, we've done that, and I'm just like, dang. But like, it's got these opportunities for, as I put it to the town and the community, like you've got opportunities to have these, magazine worthy like trails, right? Like the cover shot of a magazine, right? Like just someone like rolling down steep open rock with the ocean in the background. But you've also got the opportunity to really make this a really awesome community venue. And there was a ton of community engagement around this project. I mean, I sat down and had coffee with lots of people. And let me tell you, the town of Camden, there's like, people have a lot to say. So really like the goal is we're not building a bike park out there. That it is one of the most difficult places I've ever done trail planning and design. I mean, there's a ski hill, so you've got all the ski infrastructure. There's some pretty bad erosion issues. I mean, there's not much soil up there. I mean, that's why I talked about all the ledge, right? Like there's not much dirt, so you don't have dirt to work with and it washes away. I mean, we're getting hammered with more storms, right? We're right on the coast. So there's sort of a lot of interesting constraints going on there, but it is one that I am really, really excited about. I'm excited to, help develop some really green trails out there that just get kids, stoked on mountain biking, as well as really make sure we've got good access for all the hikers and runners of the big trail running community here. And, make use of some of those really awesome, like picturesque slabs, like just, yeah. So that one holds a special place. And I just love that, like, I've got projects that are 15 minutes from my house. Like that's special.
Yeah, in multiple ways, because one, you'll be able to take advantage of them when they, come to fruition. But two, it's like nice to actually sleep in your own bed, although you probably sleep in your own bed a lot now relative to your former role.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. OSI rents a house in Millinocket, and I generally would spend like a night or two there during the season because I'm checking in on the crew and we have so many projects. But so much of my work is close enough. And I'm willing to make the drive. I mean, the other day, talking about remote projects, we've got this project out along the Dead River of Maine in this place called the Forks. Near the Forks, I'm actually in unorganized territory when I'm out there, but woke up, drove 2.5 hours, like the last like half hours all on like gravel logging road, and then basically, did a full day of field work, like just busted out a bunch of hiking. So, but drove home, it was cool because I woke up with my kid and like got to read him a story in the morning, and I got home in time to like read him a story at night. So, yeah, I definitely appreciate. I mean, I'm always telling folks, it's a tough industry. Like, unless you work for like a land manager, like, yeah, you're going to travel. So I feel pretty lucky that I don't travel that much.
It is a tough industry. It's a very rewarding industry as well. Let's move into Maine as a state.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is Maine as a state recently voted to allocate, no, it's not really allocation, I guess.
The bond.
Yeah, they approved $30 million of bond for trails to help develop, maintain, and repair trails in Maine.
Yeah.
How did that come to be? Because I know you talked about a coalition, I think is what you may have heard it as, So
Yep.
how does that come to be, for one, to get on to even be on the ballot, two, that you guys actually approved it?
Yeah. So there's this organization that has been around for 6 or 7 years now, the Maine Trails Coalition. And I have only recently become involved since I moved to Maine. And there was a lot of awesome people involved, still involved, but a lot of awesome people involved early on in that organization. And a lot of the early conversations, and I mean it's a diverse group, and by that I mean there's the different uses, but there's also like it kind of started a lot from like the rail trail connectivity and some of those big projects happening in the state and the trail and toll rail work. That's what I mean by diverse is like it really covers like active transportation all the way to like what a lot of people on this show might think of as trails, right? So one of the big things that really came out of early conversations was just the need for funding, and especially around maintenance. There's been such a push around that. I think a lot of people do recognize we have aging legacy trails that need to be fixed. The Trails Coalition, they're not a nonprofit. They have a fiscal sponsor right now. And certainly it was, essentially volunteers. There's been funding to stipend various people to help out and staff. And so they got linked up with it. I don't know the whole backstory. So anyone who does, I hope I don't butcher it too bad, but NRCM, the Natural Resources Council of Maine, who is a lobbyist, right? Like they do this type of work. They got hooked up with Maine Trails Coalition. And again, this was sort of before my time. Like the Trails Bond was just starting to get pushed when I showed up 2 years ago. And yeah, NRCM was like, this is great. This fits with our mission. And so they really helped. I mean, they provided so much immense, like Pete Didesheim, a world I don't even understand. I know IMBA had folks involved in that, but like, right, they never flew me out to DC. I never saw that. And like a couple times I had to I did press conferences and I had to we went to the State House once and just, and I really was not a big part of that. So I really don't want to take any credit, right? Like there were so many people pushing that, but yeah, what an amazing thing, right? Like did all the work that had to be done and the people of Maine voted on it on this last election. And here it is now. And it's pretty exciting. What's been awesome is that Doug Beck at BPL, Doug manages our RTP and LWCF, and Doug will also manage what's being called the Maine Trails Program, this bond. And so Doug's a part of this Maine Trails Coalition, right? And so, and Doug has lots of great connections and relationships with folks doing trails, across the state. And so we've had lots of discussions around what this might look like. It's being modeled after RTP, but the ask is much higher. The state of Maine, our RTP is 50,000 is an ask, we hand out 120 ask a year. Well, for each category, right? For diverse, non-motorized, motorized. So 3 120s. But the thing is, if you apply for 120 and you don't get it, you don't really get anything. If you apply for 50, the state might come back and say, oh, we have 45, Anyway, this is going to allow us to open up that cap to 250, which everyone agrees is like much more impactful, right? Like this work is not $50,000 does not go very far for trails. It's great. Appreciative. It's awesome. We've used it. Doesn't do a heck of a lot. Not when we're talking about building 80, 70, right? Like we're hundreds of miles repairing all these miles of trails too. So yeah, so 250 max. So they also got a 10% match. So instead of the typical 20%. So that really opens it up, I think, to a lot more communities and organizations. So, I want to say it shows the people of Maine that, they show that they support recreation. I think a lot of people in Maine recreate, use trails. We have Maine has a huge legacy and history as a place where people recreate and come to recreate. A lot of that, was hunting and fishing, snowmobiling, recently ATVing, hiking, of course. But, people have been coming to Maine for a long time to the sporting camps and that lodge history that we have and hunting guides and all that stuff. but times have evolved, right? Now people ride bikes and they ski and they do all these other things too. So, I think it just shows that as a state, yeah, we do value this and we do support this. The hopes are that we can spend this money really well and convince the people to maybe put more money really in the budget. We don't want to be having bonds necessarily. So, I'll take this moment too to say that this Maine Trails Coalition, it's been growing and evolving, right? And it's kind of been a little ad hoc. There's been some strategic planning moments, and I talked about at the very beginning of this conversation about, coalition building, partnerships, how important that is. And so the Trails Coalition essentially over the last couple of months was like going through a transition. They formed a transition team. I sat on the transition team and we basically decided that, we're going to organize more, have better bylaws, have a true, like it's kind of been flat, a very flat organization, right? And you need to have more of a hierarchy. You need to have decision making. You just need more organization when you want to get stuff done, right? Like everyone, I hope, understands that. And so I'm really excited, a little nervous too, like got selected to be an officer. So that is really exciting, I think, because I sort of believe in the power of what this could be, having a coalition of organizations that speaks diversely about trails in the state and is able, early on, I'll tell you the first thing I said when they were like, yeah, we're going to do this trail bond thing, the first Trails Coalition meeting I went to, I was like, who the hell's going to do the work? I've got funding up in Millinocket and I can't find people to do the work, right? So I have been pushing kind of lock and step this whole time that like, we also need to think about workforce development. We need to think about this opportunity as a chance to help grow capacity. We don't just want to hire a bunch of people from away to come do all this work. That's probably impossible anyway, right? Like, I mean, this is such a small industry, right? Like, so we just need to build our resources and capacity. And so I'm excited to continue those conversations, as the Maine Trails Coalition, what can we do statewide maybe to help address that? Some of my other personal goals on a statewide coalition is to see a little more structure. I'd love to, see maybe a BMP guide developed, that can help organizations and trail builders and volunteers really understand what we're talking about with some of these things. What is a good rolling grade dip? What are these things, right? Like, what are these drainage structures? Trail classifications, right? Like, how can we better describe trails so that we can all point to something and be like, yeah, because, what some person thinks is a trail, someone else might not. And so we've got to like kind of get everyone on that level playing field. And so I'm really excited for that, because I think I said it before on the first one, education, this workforce development, this education work was a big reason why, I came to OSI. There's such a focus on, building the pipeline. We talk about that a lot, building the pipeline, really building, all the way. How can we help influence and build from little kids all the way up, right? And make sure that pipeline is always full. So to me, this trails bond, and the influx of funding we're going to have for trail maintenance and building, hopefully is an opportunity to build that pipeline here in the state. And yeah, if folks are interested, looks like we'll have some work to do.
Is there a timeline on this bond, or what's like, kind of how is it structured? I mean,
the application is supposed to open here in January and be due in June. So, I forget what the state said, but I would expect awards, late, almost 12 months from now, late next fall, early fall. So the money I don't think is really going to be spent in 25 per se, but I think the first round will be allocated and hopefully be being spent by 26.
And that sounds like it could definitely promote or, accelerate. We'll use the word accelerate the work you've been doing and others like you.
Oh yeah. I mean, every community that I've been working with, and there's certainly been a number of these like smaller communities too, just have sort of small projects who've reached out and we're assisting with, they're all thinking about this through their team. And I tell them, yeah, this is perfect. You are teeing yourself up for applying for and putting this money to use right away. Like this is the right time to be doing the planning and design. And so, it's $30 million. It's $7.5 million a year. So 4 years, if we spend all 7.5, it's a cap at 7.5. So if you don't spend it, we could go into a fifth year or sixth year. I hope we spend the money fast. That's my intent.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And the fact that it's not just on new trail development, I think so many times we see these grants or different funding streams focus on new trails, but I don't think I haven't done as many shows recently as I was a while ago, but maintenance has been a focus of every conversation I've had on this podcast in the last couple of months, because people are recognizing that we've built a lot of trail and now we got to maintain it.
I'll give another shout out to the state of Maine. This winter, we had 2 really bad storms that really destroyed our snowmobile season, which is a big hit to a lot of communities. But not just the snowmobile trails. I mean, all trails. It's the winter and no leaves on the trees. Ground was sort of frozen, no snow cover, and just torrential downpours. So you can imagine what it did to many trails across the state. The Department of Economic and Community Development, DECD, put out a grant this winter for trail damages from those storms. So, to me, that's just like another really, it's not as big as the trail bond, but it was really cool. Like we got a couple thousand, like 37,000 for Millinocket, for a bunch of trails that we had, some culverts that blew out and some other trail erosion. And mostly that was on pretty old trail that needed like a little bit of a tune up anyway. So it's like a double whammy to me, like, oh, great. We got some funding to help support going in and fixing some of this stuff. And how it goes. We'll throw in some new stuff too, and hopefully breathe a little new life in some of these old trails and get folks excited. So that's just another thing I'm proud of my state for being able to do.
Well, before we wrap this thing up, is there anything that we forgot or any other topics that you want to hit on before we hit stop on this one?
Other topics, I think there's nothing huge I want to leave people with. I really think we do need to think about this stuff a lot. This is something I'll throw on the whole community listening, is like, we need to think about our trails. You've mentioned, hey, we've got lots of trails. That means more maintenance. We've talked about what happens when you don't do planning and design. There's a lot of like new trail builders out there, who are either ignorant or willfully ignoring, good building practices. I've seen a sort of an uptick in folks who just aren't professional, right? Who don't understand being professional. And like I mentioned, like I've seen land managers more eager to just do stuff. And so I'm just like, I don't think we're heading toward a perfect storm, but like, I think it's important that we all, continue to be intentional about the work we do in our communities, make sure that we are thinking about those 3 pillars of sustainability, making sure we're, going back to what I said about environmental sustainability doesn't mean it's like the narrowest, lowest impact trail. It just means, you understand those impacts. If you want to build a jump line, make sure you're putting it in the right place, right? And make sure you're doing everything you can to make sure it doesn't just wash away into the stream, right? The social sustainability, we talk so much about that with the design stuff, but yeah, I think we do a really good job with social media and stuff of showing, high speed, fast jumps, like all this stuff that's like really more appropriate for bike only trails, when I think a lot of us probably spend a lot of time on like shared use trails. And I'm sure all of us like hike or, do stuff on foot too, right? And so, I think it's important to be thinking about that a lot. That's such a big thing. I think that moving forward, we've got to continue to share, play well together, because resources are limited, the land's limited. And so I think that's just can't be stressed enough. And just, I think I said it last time and I've said it this time, right? Like the partnership and the education, always encouraging folks to be good partners, learn how you can partner, because you can't do it alone. That's been a message that OSI has kind of been spreading in a lot of communities, is like, gone are the days when you had a mountain bike club that, held the vision for the trails, planned the trails, designed the trails, went out and dug them, and then did all the maintenance. right? Like it's so different now. It's so different. The land managers are more involved. There's professionals, we know more, there's better ways to use volunteers. The funding streams are different. The requirements are different. So, really understanding how to collaborate and partner and where you or your organization fit into making this stuff happen. And I guess if you want to come to Maine, especially if you're a young person, you want to come spend a summer in Maine, OSI has some awesome, community projects going on in the Katahdin region, which is just such a fun place to hang out. If you're a contractor and, you're a good contractor and you understand how to build sustainable trails and be professional, totally welcome you to come explore Maine and see what's about to happen with the Trails Bond and some of these projects as the funding comes up for that. We're going to need help doing this work. And so really, we're looking for people to come help. And yeah, I think I definitely have to say thanks to all the typical people who helped get me here, Imba, Rich Edwards, all that fun stuff. Mike Smith for giving me this opportunity at OSI. But, really the most important to say thank you to is my wife. And so she has been an enormous support throughout this work and has let me do this crazy adventure. So yeah, and thank you, Josh, for this avenue to talk about OSI and to talk about Maine, which is just, to me, a very special place, obviously. And I hope folks can come visit us and lend a hand if they want to. So yeah, man, thanks. And yeah, hope we chat sooner.
We will chat sooner. I'm fairly certain of it. So, well, Steve, thank you very much for being very generous with your time today. We have once again about an hour and 54 minutes recorded. That'll cut down a little bit, but I don't cut a whole lot out. So it's greatly appreciated.
Apologies, Pick a long plane ride to listen to this one.
Hopefully your lawn is big.
Yeah.
Or you just break it up. Thank you for listening. If you like what you have heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail Effect podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail Effect podcast. Also, don't forget to check out Cooley Creative at www.dojustsendit.com. For additional ways to help support the Trail Effect podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail Effect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain Apparel, Worldwide Cyclery, and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.